All right. So that being said, this is what we call the Afterburn. Okay, so if you have comments or questions about the teaching today, you are welcome to type them in on the live stream as we open the chat back up. You're also welcome to raise your hand if you're here locally. I got to make a little mark here so I know where I ended. Okay. And then we can go through this little Q&A time that we do called the Afterburn. So if you have a comment or question on today's teaching specifically, and hopefully limited to today's teaching, please go ahead and we'll go and deal with that now. If you have a question about anything else, some of you on live stream are new, you don't know me, you're new to all this, I want to encourage you two things. One is, as soon as the service ends, we will be selling you all the teachings. No, I'm kidding. All right, everything is free on our website. Everything is free on YouTube. So there's not a teaching that I have that you can't find and get for free. So I encourage you to go and access those. I mentioned a few of them today that you might be interested in hearing. The Millennium and Kingdom, Do You Know the Father and the Son? Making decisions, the reason you exist. These are all some of the ones that you may want to listen to, okay? Actually, endure, receive the crown of life. I didn't mention it, but that would go along with the patience idea and endurance. And so you might want to listen to that. Okay, if you have comments or questions about things that are not specifically related to today, then you are always welcome to contact us. On our website is our phone number and other ways to contact us. All right, that being said, Owen's going to go around with the mic and he's going to begin with Shira.
Wow, so much great stuff here. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Amen.
I have two thoughts I wanted to run by you. First of all, coming from New England, the soil up there is infamously rocky. And I really appreciated your talking about that we're responsible to till our soil. And here's the thought that I had. You know, I thought about times when I tried to plant a garden up there. Ripping up thorns by hand is really painful and arduous. Trying to clear rocks is backbreaking. And shallow soil, that would usually indicate bedrock. So you really need to not use that for your garden. You have to have a whole paradigm shift.
True.
And so what struck me was, but if you have a friend who has a backhoe, you can deal with those thorns a whole lot more easily. It's a lot more violent on the soil, but it's so much easier. I mean, and the same thing with bedrock. There's things that go through and get rid of rocks. They have machines that pick out rocks. And the thought I had was, your teacher has the heavy equipment to help you.
Amen. Listen, that's a really good point, and that's why, you may also realize that you can move to better ground. In other words, where there's community, where there's help, as opposed to just trying to do this by yourself, and then you're the only one pulling the rocks out of the garden, and you don't have anybody help you, till that out and recognize. So doing it with each other should be also easier and basically make the ground more fertile. And so so you have heavy equipment, but also you might just realize, you know what, I got to garden somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
Because gardening here is, by the way, coming down here, the actual dirt, a lot of it is clay and it's very hard to grow things in. But the point is we're doing it as a metaphor, and the metaphor is that things should be a lot easier here.
Praise Yah. And then, wow, when you were talking about we need to be anchored for our eagerness to maintain its flame, we need to be anchored to the expectations set before us. And I thought of, in Revelation 1, right away, it says, "Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of this prophecy and guard what is written in it, for the time is near." And I can remember for years wondering, what's that special blessing? What is that all about? And today I felt like you really tied that together to fuel the eagerness and develop the patience to stay eager and to stay diligent if we can just keep focused on the promises, not on all the weird beasts and things like that, but
Amen.
The fact that in the end, that's what we're looking for. We're actually going to be alive forever to see the almighty Elohim, the Father, come down here with a new heaven and a new earth.
Amen. Absolutely. Now, just to be clear, I was not saying that you should eagerly be expecting the understanding of the book of Revelation, but just but eagerly expecting what is supposed to be coming when you get to chapter 21 and 20, okay? When you get to the end in 21 and the New Jerusalem and the new heavens and new earth, etc. Amen. Excellently put, Shira. Thank you. Who's next? Okay, Nate.
On that same line, what came to my mind while you were going over that part of the parable about the soil was that as we stay in His Word, if we trust that He's going to shine down on us, if we're inspecting our soil, it's a lot easier to inspect the soil if we're digging into His Word and having a teacher that's helping us to learn from that. But sometimes we have to get down on our knees in order to get in there and really find the stuff that is in there that is. Sometimes we can't use that big machine to get in there, especially if we've got fruit that's already growing. We have to be a little more delicate. And getting on our knees sometimes is more important to get in there and find that stuff that's within us that needs to be cleaned out. And then we have to actually take that stuff and not only chuck it to the side, but maybe put it in a wheelbarrow and take it far away from where it was. And so that's what was coming to mind when I was listening to your teaching today, Rabbi.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Look, and also just to kind of keep that analogy going, how many times have you been doing something like that and it doesn't take much for someone who just walked over, said hi, and they're talking to you and they haven't been there all day like you have, and they look down and they go, oh, you missed a spot. But that's part of community, though, because they'll see something that you were so zoomed in on it, you were so doing it that it's easy to miss a spot. So it doesn't take much, though. That's why we have our friends. Of course, say it nicely when you do it, but just say, hey, by the way, there's a rock right there you missed or whatever. Or they may just reach down and help you and pick it up and toss it out for you. But, that's part of community, is that other eyes may see something you miss, All right, who's next? Gary?
Yeah, so it's the same theme as something that came to me. So, try not to.
Got to get that mic right up there.
So with the gardening and the tilling of things in the ground, and the rain often in Scripture is used for an idiom as the word, the teachings. And Rabbi from teaching may be that heavy equipment in that role where he is now, where he is like the bulldozer sometimes going in and moving the big rocks. But what Nate just said is something that has been on my mind too, that sometimes we have to get in there and when the fruit's in there and back to the parable of the wheat and the tare, that it's not our job to go in and root up the tares because we don't know the difference between wheat and tares. But there's sometimes we don't see those finer things in our own lives, and that's where counseling comes in. And I know Rabbi, from having interacted with him over the years, this is where he's not and he's mentioned this before, but I'm just trying to support that this is where sometimes you need that bulldozer, you need that heavy equipment, but it's not in that counsel role where Rabbi's coming in with the delegate, you got the gloves on and you're searching through there and helping you to see some of the things and to tweak that ground so it can produce more fruit. Where we read in that parable, sometimes it brings forth 100, the 60, and the 30. And he's trying to get you to produce that 30 and then to the 60 and then to the 100. And so it's an encouragement that for me personally, I have experienced that, and we need that where sometimes the gardener comes in with the gloves and is able to come in there and do some more fine things.
Amen. Okay, so let's take that analogy another step forward. And some of you people have this problem. You want the gardener, help from like the leader type person, but you bring them in and say, okay, I need help, but you can only help me in this little corner of the patch of the garden. Anybody guilty of that? I'd love you to come help me with my garden, but just this little corner over here, that'll be enough. That's fine. All right, who's next? Yes, sir.
It's fascinating when that lady had talked about the soil and everything, and having had the chance to go to Israel a few times, it's always fascinating when you fly into Ben Gurion Airport. Here's this big, huge complex, trucks, planes, whatever, and then you can look out on the outer perimeters of that airport. Those guys are farming. And then staying in Samaria and riding across the highway there to get back into Israel, and you see olive trees, and you look at rocks, old junky cars and everything, and yet those olive trees have been there for hundreds, thousands of years, and they're still growing and they're still producing. That, to me, is really serious about being deep into the soil.
Amen. Appreciate that. All right, Rabbi Tom.
Thank you, sir. What you said about gardens and the little stones. Years ago, we had a garden in Pennsylvania, and we got out a lot of big rocks. They were easy to see. But every year, we got it, when we would till it up, a lot of these little stones came up, and I collected buckets full every year, the little stones. And it seemed that they would never end. And that's what I thought of. We got little stones in our lives, but if we put them all together, they take up more space than some of the big ones.
It's true. And they take more to get them out of there, too, because the big ones are easy to identify, they're easy to see, they're easy to go ahead and pull out. All right, Dawn?
It reminded me when we had our garden in New York. For a while, we thought that every time it rained, we were growing more rocks because the rain would wash the nice soil off and you'd have just a whole garden full of these little stones. It was very frustrating, but it took years of doing that before we actually would get rain where we didn't have to go out and pick rocks. So the tortoise and keep going.
Patience. That's right. We need to have those patience. Okay, Christina?
So I so appreciate all of the little nuggets and all of the little things that you've been teaching with the milk and the meat, and then with the parable of the sower, and and everything that everyone was talking about. But I'm needing a little help trying to, because the writer of Hebrews they go off on a lot, it seems like a lot of rabbit trails, and it's going in this big circle and trying to connect. And from what I understand, Hebrews is supposed to bring us around to the understanding of why Yeshua is a Melchizedekian priest. And so we have all of these little puzzle pieces that are all out, and I just appreciate each one of them and each of the teachings that you've done. But I'm having a little bit of a hard time trying to keep the thread going in my mind so that I understand exactly where we're going with that particular thing. Have we just not gotten to it with chapter 7, or okay? I was hoping you might be able to clarify that a little bit. It's all going to be clear in chapter 7. Okay.
Chapter 7 really explains all that. But also you got to understand that the reason that I don't want to mock or pick on Christina because a lot of you may have the same thought process. I think I've made it really clear. But you're swimming upstream against all the years of the other stuff. So even though I think it's been, especially when I've laid it out with the kind of the reset at the beginning of each teaching, it's a very simplistic, actually, there are no rabbit trails. It seems to you that way, though, because it goes against and it's not just you're an example of lots of people. But there's so much wrong teaching and so much wrong usage of the book of Hebrews that what's simplistically going around in this nice, it's actually really a straight line or a nice tight circle where it's all going to come around together, seems much more disjointed to you because it's still swimming upstream against the other stuff until it finally all clicks together. I think next week we'll click more of it together and it'll make sense to you. So I'm not picking on you at all. I think you're probably a very common thought that's out there of people that are listening to this right now in the room or on live stream, because it's so much, well, let me say it, the book of Hebrews has been used so much in such a wrong way, and it's one of the books that Christians are more familiar with than maybe most other books, okay? It's used so much, and therefore, the simplicity of what I've shown you is harder to see. That's really the thing that shows you about the delusion and about the thing that we're trying to come out of, is that the simple doesn't look simple. But for the rest of you that are further along in that kind of decompressing out of Christianity, it's looking simple, okay? So I just want to encourage you, it'll get there. It'll look simple. It's just that you're newer in taking that mindset of this piece. Not all the pieces. I know you've been doing this for a little while, but I'm saying is this piece has never really been addressed this way by anybody that I'm aware of, and so it's just going to take a little bit. And so when you see, I think next week you'll be like, oh, okay, all right? Just give it some time, all right? Because I think most of it is a perception more than a reality. I think I've really very simplistically laid it out, but it can only be received that way if you've let go of a lot of the other things. And so it's not your fault. I mean, it's just you have a lot of stuff that was put there, on purpose by being well-churched and whatever, Okay, live stream.
From a McTigret family, says, is it possible that the answer to Hebrews 6, 17, 18 is found in Jeremiah 31, 35 through 37?
Well, we're going to deal with Jeremiah 31 and those verses, later into chapter 7 or 8. So we're definitely going to get there. Actually in chapter 8. But let me just see which ones you're referring to, but I'm pretty sure I know what you're referring to, so just give me a second. Well, I mean, those are encouragements that it talks about how, thus said Yahweh, gives the sun, for light by day, the laws of the moon, stars, and sun, light by night, it stirs up the sea, etc. He says, if these laws vanish before me, so would the seed of Israel from being a nation, and if the heavens could be measured and the foundation of the earth measured, I would also cast off Israel from being, for all they've done. And so, that I don't know if that's exactly connected to what's going on in Hebrews. The thing in Jeremiah is that the verses you're quoting Jeremiah are connected to the promises to Abraham. Okay, so the reason he's saying what he's saying in Jeremiah 31, 35 to 37 is because of the promises to Abraham, which is not really mentioned in those verses in Jeremiah, but that's the point. So from that point of view, yes, that would be connected to Hebrews 6. Okay?
From Sharon Hillary, says, Rabbi, is the priesthood of Melchizedek higher than the Levitical priesthood in authority, or do they share the same level of authority?
No, they're higher. Remember, Moses and Aaron give you the perfect example. Moses was Melchizedekian, Aaron was Levitical. Moses was higher.
From Roland Jackson, Hebrews 6:4, could you explain the heavenly gift?
Okay, I was going to try and figure out a wise guy answer for that, but I won't. Okay, so look, it's simply the heavenly gift is his poking you and opening your eyes, opening your ears, and giving you the ability to understand him. The gift is the calling. Okay, because he's talking about, therefore, it's impossible those who were once enlightened and having tasted of the heavenly gift. What heavenly gift? The enlightenment. It's a gift from Elohim. You did not deserve it. He, out of his mercy and compassion, his unmerited favor. Remember, so we talked about it was unmerited before he called you, and then you merit everything after he calls you. And so having tasted of that gift, the enlightenment, it's actually in the same verse. Impossible those who have once tasted once have been enlightened, and having tasted the gift of enlightenment. Okay, so it's the enlightenment. It's the opening of the eyes and the ears. Next.
From Cheryl W., is it safe to say if Father is still revealing to us and teaching us through a teacher, then we are not being sluggish?
I don't think those two things are connected, because the sluggishness is going to be all about what you do with what you're hearing, even if you have a teacher. Okay? It's like I've said, look, information is not power. Knowledge is not power. It's applied knowledge that's power. And so everything else is potential power. Same thing with having a teacher. You could have books, you could have videos, you could have audio tapes, you could have CDs, and none of that's going to matter if you don't apply it. So you can still be sluggish. Because remember, the sluggishness has to do with the idea of being averse to the activity or exertion. It doesn't take a whole lot of exertion to play something in the background and listen to it, okay? But it's the slow in movement or action. It's the slow to perform. So if you have a teacher, it doesn't exempt you from sluggishness. Matter of fact, I can promise you I'm a teacher to quite a few sluggish people. Own it if you own it. I won't look anybody in the eye right now, okay?
From Olivia and Janet Hoffman, says, Rabbi, would you elaborate more on how we can get the pruning and tilling process within the context of a marriage, about having the accountability partner, please?
No, look, that gets a little bit too complicated for this teaching. What I would say simply is just remember that your spouse will often be a good reflective mirror if they do it respectfully. Now, if it's while you're fighting and they throw it in your face, you call yourself a covenanted person, you call yourself, now that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a person who comes up to you in love and says, honey, you may not realize this, but you've got this thing that's going on that probably needs to be addressed, okay? And they may be in love able to see something and share with you. So that's what I'm talking about there. The rest of it is something that's going to be too complex for this teaching. The other thing I want to get to, though, is actually the previous comment on another thing hit me about it. When it talks about if you have a teacher, does that mean you're not sluggish, etc., whatever the way that was worded? I want you to do something, and I'm going to be very strong about this, not just the person who asked that question, but all of you. Stop looking outside for everything. In other words, to do it for you, so I don't need to do this if somebody from the outside. Okay, the outside is for guidance and instruction, but you have to do. Stop thinking, well, if I have this, then I don't have to. No. Or if I have this, then I'm okay and I've arrived. No. You still need to apply, do. Stop looking outside for everything. Now, you have to look outside for the guidance and the wisdom and the instruction, but that's it. I don't make anybody do or not do, because that's on you. Okay? So I'm not saying that's what the person who asked the question is actually doing, but just in case you are or anybody else is, stop. That's a Christianized thing. The outside thing does it for me. The outside thing fixes it for me. The outside thing rescues me for it. Look, we're going to do a lot of teaching, maybe it's Sukkot if I can get it worked out and write it out for you, on the idea between the victim and the hero. Stop being the victim. Now, people say the word playing the victim. No, not playing it, being it. Okay, a lot of you had stuff happen to you in your lives, and you were a victim. But as soon as that moment ended, you had the choice to no longer be a victim. Didn't say it was easy, don't get me wrong, but you have a choice. You know what the hero is? The person that recognizes that I have full power and opportunity to do whatever I want from this moment going forward, no matter what happened before. The hero does what has to get done. That's what makes them a hero. The hero is not looking for somebody else to come in and do it for them. The hero is going to do everything they can and with their strength, knowing that they still might need wisdom and guidance and all that, but they're going to do. But see, we got a lot of victim people here. And I'm not saying you haven't had horrible things happen to you. You have. I've had horrible things happen to me that could have ruined my whole life if I wanted to stay intrinsically in my nature a victim. So I'm glad I'm saying this. I'm going to talk about this in the men's and the women's class today a little bit too. But understand, it's kind of like when I talk about, my wife and I barely knew each other. I'm going to use this just for an example. We barely knew each other, and she was doing something that I thought was irritating at that moment. We just knew each other a little while, and I said to her, well, whatever. Now, she didn't know me well enough to know whether I meant that I thought she was an annoying or irritating person in general, or just this little thing. But we could take that the same way with anything. Is something defining you, or is it momentary? Okay, you could do something that annoys the whatever out of me, and I can say, that's annoying. Or you could think, he thinks I'm an annoying person, like that's my defining nature. No. If you were a victim, that was a moment. It should not have defined you. But all of you who are really traumatically victimized have had times in your life where you let it define you. That needs to be fixed or you can't really get forward. Because you should be a hero, a victor, not a victim. Okay? And that victim thing, I don't have my notes here, it's actually my notes for the class later, has a lot to do with what are you going to choose in terms of how you will let something define you. Israel could have came out of Egypt and had the definition, we're slaves. We only think like slaves, we only know how to be slaves because we've been slaves. Now, it took them a little while to figure out how to be free. It also took them a while to understand that they weren't being set free in total general, but free to switch masters. That was a learning curve. So you were a victim, there's a learning curve. Okay? You had stuff happen to you. It happened. There's no doubt. But now, can you use it for experiential and informational use only, or are you going to let it define you? And some of you know what I'm talking about, because some of you still let what happened to you define you. And define your future, define what's possible, limit you in every possible way. And I don't know how to fix that for you, because I can't. You have to fix that. You have to choose victory. Oh no, I want to pray over it and have Messiah just wipe it out, and not happening that way. Not generally. You got to choose. Do you know that everything that happened even before the word I just said is gone? There's only right now. There's no future either, by the way. There's only right now. We have an expectation about the future. There's only right now. And you can decide that right now is completely designed and affected and created out of what you already did, or you can choose to go any way you want. You could do anything you want right at this moment. Okay? You could choose to stand up and walk out. You could choose to stay in your seat. You could choose to shout. You could choose to be quiet. You could choose to do anything. I'm just saying, you have free, but no, I'm defined by all the stuff that happened to me. Only if you let it. Okay, Tony Robbins, I think he's one of the best motivational speakers out there, uses the phrase, the past does not equal the future. Unless, of course, you choose to let it define your future. It doesn't have to be your future. All right? Now I sound like Joel Osteen all of a sudden. Motivational speaking and all this stuff. But this is about what's going on here. Because these people are about to experience this horrific thing, and they can let it define them in a wrong way, or they could grow out from it. Okay? You have those choices in your life too. All right, next question, if anybody wants to go after that.
No, there's no more.
All right, there you go. Wisdom in the chat room. Okay? I want you to anchor onto the promise and the expectancy that you, every one of you, absolutely can and should be a eternally living child of the living Elohim in your future. But you still have the choice to not stay in him. You still have the choice to not get there. But you have no excuse. He called you. Here's something I need you to understand, and then we'll end with this. Does Yahweh lie? No. Is Yahweh wrong about anything? Does he make mistakes? Well, then he called you knowing all your junk that happened before the moment he called you. So he knew that from that point in time in your life, you could get there. Why don't you embrace that? He called you knowing that you were raped and you were abused and you were beat up and you were verbally told you were garbage and you were neglected and you were whatever, abandoned and you were rejected. He knew all that. You were a drug addict. You'd been in jail. What doesn't matter. He called you after whatever all that stuff is, knowing you could still get there. But you can't get there if you're so stuck in the past. Okay, that's right. Brianna did the song, right? We were not built to break. All right? We'll make that into a t-shirt. We got to figure that out for the cover for the album. We will not built to break. Okay? Okay, so this is really important that we understand this, because I think sometimes when people call me and I'm counseling, they forget that they're struggling. I said, but Abba called you knowing you had all this baggage. And he doesn't make mistakes. Okay? Okay, so he knew that he called you at a moment. He knew exactly what he was doing. He's always right. We just don't always see it. Amen? All right, let's get the children. All right, we're going to go ahead and get reset for the Oneg.